Hello and thank you for watching. My name is Audrey Archer and this is my presentation for EDU 7040 at South College. It's titled The Value of Effective Organizational Communication Across Diverse Cultures. Communication is really the connective tissue of any and all organizations. It shapes how people interpret shared goals, how they work through disagreements, and how trust gets built across differences in roles, backgrounds, and in cultures. In this presentation, I want to walk through 3 ideas that are central to understanding communication in culturally diverse settings. First, how cultural differences show up in both global and domestic interactions. Second, the role communication plays in actually shaping an organization's culture. And third, why cultural sensitivity matters so much when working with international employees, students, or clients. My goal is to show that communication cannot be treated as a one-size-fits-all in any organization that operates across cultural lines. Let's begin with the global side. Hofstede's 1980s research on cultural dimensions is really foundational here. He showed that things like power distance, individualism versus collectivism, and how comfortable a culture is with uncertainty all shapes how people communicate and make decisions within organizations. Here's a concrete example. Imagine a manager from a culture with low power distance, someone who is used to open pushback and debate. In a negotiation, they might expect a business partner to challenge their proposal directly. But if that partner comes from a high power distance culture, they might see that same pushback as disrespectful or even inappropriate for the workplace. So the exact same interaction gets read 2 completely different ways, just depending on the cultural lens of which a person has. Now, cultural variation isn't just an international issue, it shows up domestically too. Hoy and Miskel's 2013 framework points out that organizational culture is rarely one unified thing. It's typically made up of subgroups with different values and norms based on their region or generation or even their professional background. Think about a company with offices in a small rural town and a big metropolitan city. Employees in each place might have really different expectations about formality, how quickly they should be responding to emails or phone calls, or even how the hierarchy of the business works. That produces the same kind of miscommunication that we just talked about with Hofstede. Even though everyone involved shares the same nationality and speaks the same language, there are still differences within the culture. This brings me to the second major idea, which is that communication doesn't just reflect an organization's culture, it actually builds it. Sheen's 2010 model of organizational culture explains how repeated communication patterns, whether they may be formal or informal, gradually become embedded as shared assumptions that define who the organization is. Here's what that may look like in practice. If leadership only communicates big decisions through infrequent top-down memos, that pattern itself creates a culture of guarded uncertainty. People start to feel like they're the last to know things. But if an organization keeps regular two-way communication, that will build a culture where people feel a real sense of ownership over outcomes. So if communication shapes cultures, it can also be used intentionally to strengthen it. Cameron and Quinn's 2011 Competing Values Framework identifies different cultural types: hierarchical, market-driven, adhocracy, and clan-oriented. It also shows that each one depends on a specific kind of communication to hold it together. When there's a mismatch between how an organization communicates and what kind of culture it's trying to be, that is usually where dysfunction tends to show up. Hattie's 2012 research backs this up too, showing that clarity and consistency in communication is linked to stronger collective efficacy among team members. A clan-oriented organization is a good example, since it really depends on frequent relationship-centered check-ins. Take that communication away, and the trust that the culture relies on starts to erode pretty quickly. Now let's move to the third idea, cultural sensitivity. This becomes essential anytime an organization is working with people whose cultural backgrounds differ from its dominant norms. Hall's 1976 work on high context versus low context communication is very useful here. In high context cultures, people rely a lot on indirect cues and shared understanding. In low context cultures, communication tends to be a much more explicit and direct thing. So let's picture a client from a high context culture working with a colleague from a low context culture. The colleague gives blunt, direct feedback, and the client reads that as disrespect. Meanwhile, the client's more direct communication style gets read by colleagues as somewhat invasive. Neither person is wrong, they're just operating from different communication norms and without cultural sensitivity. That gap can create serious damage within trust. So, what does it actually look like to build cultural sensitivity into communication practice? Alder and Aiken's 2018 review of international management offers some practical guidance. Things like offering multiple channels or formats for communication, providing translation or interpretation support what's needed, and setting up regular checkpoints to make sure outreach is actually reaching everyone it's meant to reach rather than just assuming. A good example would be a multinational company that provides client materials in several languages and offers both written and verbal follow-up options. It's not a one-time fix, it's treating cultural sensitivity as an ongoing part of how the organization communicates. Let's bring this all together. Effective organizational communication really sits at the intersection of three things: cultural awareness, cultural construction, and cultural sensitivity. Recognizing cultural differences, whether across international borders or within a single domestic organization, helps leaders catch friction before it damages the trust of their employees and clients. Understanding that communication actively shapes cultures rather than just reflecting it gives organizations a real tool for building cohesion on purpose. Practicing cultural sensitivity makes sure that communication efforts genuinely reach the diverse employees, students, and clients that an organization serves. Together, I think that these three ideas offer a solid foundation for building stronger, more culturally responsive organizations. Thank you so much for watching. My references are listed here on the screen if you would like to explore the sources further. Thank you.